everyone, my name's Christy. Welcome to my corner. Thanks for joining me today for this tutorial on how I turned this book, it's a photo album, and 2 pencils into a loom. And I decided to do this because I've been doing a lot of weaving lately, and I've been showing it on my Instagram and on my YouTube channel, and a lot of my followers and subscribers have been feeling apparently a little inspired to weave. And I thought that I would just show people how they can try out weaving without having to spend money on a loom. Because looms can really be expensive. And if you're not quite sure that you like the art form, buying a loom and then not using it is really frustrating. Also, looms are large. Even my cheap small loom has to have a place to live. But a book already has a place to live. It's called a bookshelf. And so this way you can have a loom, you can weave casually when you want to, see if you like weaving, see if it's something that you're interested in without spending money. And if you don't like it, you can just put that back where it belongs. So I'm going to take you over to my workstation across the room there, and I'm going to show you how I made the loom. And then I'm going to make a small tapestry weaving. I'm going to use the smaller end because I do have a larger loom. So what I was looking for was a way to make a small loom. Also, by the way, I'm going to know by February. It's February of 2022 and I'm going to know by February. But I wanted to play around with different size looms. So I'm like, I need to make it with what I have. So I took you along for the ride. So just to repeat myself, we're going to go across the room. I'm going to show you how I do it, make a little weaving, and then come back here and I'll tell you the tips and tricks and, you know, different ideas for how you can use the loom and also its limitations, because it does have limitations. So I'll see you on the flip side. Here are the materials that you need to make a simple loom out of things that you have around the house. And so this is a book. It's just a fabric covered photo album. You need a ruler, a kitchen knife, 2 pencils, a sharpie or other marking pen, masking tape, and then a warp thread. And in this case, this is just a cotton thread, very thin cotton yarn that I got at Tuesday Morning ages and ages ago. And that is, I don't even know why I got it, because I didn't have anything to do with it at the time, but I bought a ton of it. It was cheap, apparently. This is why I'm going to know by month. So these are all the materials that you need. And the loom, the warp threads, which are the up and down threads, and you weave through them, are going to go on the short end of the book here because I want to have a very small loom. So let's get started. First things first, you have to prep the pencils. And the pencils are what is going to give your warp threads exact space. And they're also what's going to give your entire weaving tension and lift it up off the book so that you can weave under it. And what you want to do is you want to take a ruler and measure, and these are just really cheap, very cheap pencils. And you just want to measure about every 1/4 inch. All the way down the pencil. And you want to do that for both of them. Okay, so I have 2 pencils with marks about a 1/4 inch apart. And for my metric folks, that's roughly somewhere between a 1/2 centimeter and a centimeter. Essentially, you just want it to be even, and 4 wraps per inch is fairly common in weaving. So now is where the butter knife, the kitchen knife, comes in. You want to make a little indent at each location. And the nice thing about pencils is that they have a flat, at least these cheap pencils, is that they are flat on one side. So you can actually, well, they're flat on all sides. So they won't roll as easily, which is kind of nice. So what you're doing with your kitchen knife is you're just making, there's the first dot right there, and you just want to make a notch in it. And I might use the other side, so it's a fairly large divot. I don't know if you can see that. You can see that there's like a divot right here. And you want to make that divot on every mark all the way down. So here you can see, I hope, that there is a notch at each dot. So each notch is about a 1/4 inch from the next notch. So I'm going to do this to the same thing to this pencil, and then I will come back and we'll keep going. Oh, and I ended up just putting this on the knife just because I was like, I wasn't cutting up my hand because this is of course a kitchen knife, but it was painful. So I got much better pressure when I was able to use a cloth. So I recommend using a cloth. All right, so we have 2 dented pencils that are fairly even. They're not perfect, but that's really okay. They don't have to be perfect. So all we need now, we don't need the Sharpie or the knife anymore. We do need the ruler just to measure, like to make sure our sides are even. So I have my book, and what I want to do is mark off, you know, I want this to be in the middle. Let's just say we're going to do like 4 inches wide. I want to take a piece of masking tape and mark that there. And then if we're doing 4 inches, and put that there. And then this is from the end, a little over 2 inches from there. And then we'll do 4 inches. And then we'll go 4 inches from here. I know I'm very close to you. My face is right next to the camera. So now we have the outer edges of our loom. It's going to be a small loom that runs this way. And what we're going to want to do is wrap our thread around this way. So if we want 4 inches, that means that there are 17 notches. And so we want to make sure that we have enough to go around this book 17 times. So we need, which is double this. So what is that? 17 times 2 is 34. And then you want to add extra. So I'm going to do 40 lengths of this. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 39, 40. So that's about 40. And you want to just cut it off. And we shouldn't need this anymore. Now let's find those knots. I had a couple of knots. So we can deal with the knots now. Okay. So this is going to be the front of our loom. This is the front of the book. That was the picture where my grandmother had her, I want to say 75th birthday. You want to take your end, a little piece of masking tape, tape it to your book. And this is why you want a book that the masking tape will come off of. So this will come off really easily. You don't, like, you know, you don't want to ruin the book. You can always wrap the book in newspaper or a paper bag or wrapping paper. They sell really amazing kind of plasticky wrapping paper that's difficult to tear, and that might be helpful too. Okay, and once you have your end taped on, you want to wrap this around something. So I think I'm just going to wrap it around my ruler since I have it here. Okay, so the goal is just to keep this neat. That's what we want. We don't want it all bunched up and tangled. So I'm going to raise you up a bit so hopefully you can really see what I'm doing. So the first thing you want to do is wrap this string around your book. I would say twice because you want some slack on the side. And then you want to wrap this around 17 times because you want 17 strings on the front. At this point, the most important thing you want to remember is to make sure they don't overlap. You don't want them overlapping. And a round bobbin or something probably would have worked better than the ruler, but we're working with what we got. Okay, so here we have 17 strings in between these lines. We have 2 extras over here and we have some extra over here. We didn't need to go that much, but I like it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to wrap this around the end over here and tape it. So the goal is that you have these kind of strings in the middle that you're going to use to weave, and you have your strings on the side that you're not using to weave at the moment. So what you want to do is you want to tighten these as much as possible. The thing about cotton is that cotton stretches a bit, so it'll never be absolutely tight as a drum, but we're going to try and get as close as we can get. And that's where the pencils will come in. So if you see what I'm doing, I'm taking each one and just tightening it a little bit. And you see all the slack that's in there. And having a nice tight loom is really important. All right, so now that it's tight, we can unwrap this. Oops, I'll show you, sorry. We can unwrap this. And I'm going to tape it right there. And I'm going to cut this. This is much too long. And I'm going to tape this one right here. And unwrap this. I'm going to tie them together. This we don't need anymore. Tie them together as best I can. So this is where we don't need the tape anymore. That didn't tie very tightly, but that's okay. So now we have strings on the front. That will be our warp strings. So let's spread them apart a bit. Okay, and this is where the pencils come in. So now you want to take your pencil and put it under. Better to put it in that way. And then you turn it and you can fit all of the strings into your divots that you made. That's the point of the divots. So now we have all of our warp threads in their little grooves, and you want to shift the pencil down to the bottom. And you take your second pencil, slide it under, and do the same thing. And so you want to fit them into the divots and move it up to the top. You shift it up. And so now what you have is a really nice tight warp that you can weave with. So let me get some materials and do a little bit of weaving. I'm going to do a simple neutral weaving. I have these 3 different yarns. These are needlepoint wool yarn, and this is, I'm assuming, acrylic. Yeah, this one's acrylic, and I got this one just from Michael's, I'm sure, on clearance, you know. And then I have my scissors. So I'm going to do just a little bit of weaving. This is not a weaving tutorial, but I just want to show you what you can make with something like this. back and it is the next day, and I just want to, you know, keep on weaving. Finish this up today. One thing you want to be careful of as you're weaving with this loom is that you don't catch underneath the pencil. You don't catch your weft strings underneath, underneath the pencil, because that will really it'll get caught, and because this one's sharpened, it'll, you know, split it and all that kind of stuff. Alright, so I finished off my little beige weaving here, and I'm going to take it off the loom. And the nice thing is, so I did a twine stitch at the top and the bottom, so this is fairly stable. I definitely recommend on a loom like this that you do a finishing stitch, like a hem stitch or a twining stitch, just because you have to manipulate it a little bit in order to get it off, because you have to flip it over and cut it off. The one downside of this loom is that I like to weave in my ends when it's on the loom when it's tight. In this case, you can't do that. It also will loosen over time, but you just have to keep tightening it. Or if you really want to, you can tape these pencils where you want them on the book. But I don't think it's necessary, and I think that this turned out pretty darn cute. So the first thing you want to do to get this off is you want to loosen it up and pull out the pencils. And then you flip it over and you just want to cut it off and not cut the book. And this is why you want to loosen it off, and this is why you want a fairly stable top and bottom. And now you're done with the book, you can take the tape off and put it back on your shelf. You don't have to store a loom. And so here we have a tiny little loom that you can hang on a dowel, or you can, you know, mount in a frame. If you want to know how to mount a weaving in a frame, I did that tutorial last week. I'll put a link up here. Is it up here? I don't know. It's somewhere. So I think what I'm going to do is tie off all the little ends, and that will help it stay stable. And I'm just tying it off with an overhand. I don't know what this is called. I don't know what kind of a knot this is. Just like that, all the way across. And we do have an odd number of strings, so the last one will probably have to be 3. So I'll come back when that's done. You don't have to watch me tie knots. Okay, so it's all knotted, and I'm just going to weave in all the ends, and then you'll see the finished project. And there we go. There's a tiny little weaving that was done with a book and a couple of pencils as your loom. I'm going to take you back to the corner and see you soon. So I hope that was interesting for you. Here is my little tapestry that I made. It's, I don't know, 6 inches, 5 inches, and I honestly think it's adorable. I decided to go for neutral palette. I was able to do all sorts of different stitches. I was able to do just like a regular weave. This is a, what is this? Egyptian knot, I think it's called. Orion knot. pick and pick. I think it's what it's called. So I was able to do all sorts of different stitches. I could have done some fringes if I had wanted to. Oh, these are Raya loops, I'm sorry. I could have done some Raya knots and had some fringe if I had wanted to, but I decided not to. So you can do a lot of things with this. The main issue with this kind of a loom is because it has a solid back, it's difficult to weave in the ends. And I know I mentioned this, but I like weaving in my ends when it's tight, and this one I couldn't. So that was a little inconvenient, and it made for kind of a sloppy weaving in. Although the end result is not bad. That's my back. So it's not bad. Kind of put this in a note while, you know, in there while I was talking about it. There are people who sell wooden looms that are actually looms that have a solid back. And I think some people basically do like weave them upside down. So the side that's facing the board is actually the front of the weaving, and the side you're looking at is the back of the weaving. And this would let you weave in your ends while it's still tied on, but it's more difficult to do the different loops and knots methods, and you can't see what it looks like. So I personally wouldn't do it that way, but what the heck do I know? You know, I mean, who does it hurt to try? So you can always try it that way too. As you can see, it does use a lot of warp thread. So you're using actually double the amount of warp thread that you'd be using on a regular loom. So that is definitely something to keep in mind if you're deciding to scale up the project. I probably wouldn't go much more than this, and this is probably an 8.5 by 11 or close to an A4. I think A4 is the normal size paper, office paper in non-US terms. And so this is about 8 inches, 8.5 inches, and I probably wouldn't go much bigger than that. It just would be such a waste of your warp thread, and you already use a ton of warp thread when you're, you know, warping things. All in all, I think it was successful. Here, I'll show you my pencils. So I hope that you can see the divots, and they're every 1/4 inch. And the great thing about this is that if you want a denser warp, you just make your divots like further apart. I mean, or closer together. If you want a looser weave, make them further apart. So you can have, you know, I could put a little piece of masking tape around these and that says 1/4 inch, right? And then have another set that is 1/2 inch or 1/8 inch. So I feel like this is very versatile. It doesn't cost any money. It doesn't take any tools. And it's actually quite effective. I mean, I don't feel like this tiny little weaving looks like it was woven on a book and some pencils. So I hope that this was interesting and helpful for you and maybe inspired you to try a new craft. And you know, we all love trying new crafts, especially if we can do it on the cheap. At least I do. Oh, another tip for weaving. The nice thing about weaving is that you can use for the warp, you need longer pieces of thread, twine, floss, yarn, whatever. But for the warp, you can use scraps. And so you can actually like go on Etsy and buy scraps. This is macrame scraps. So I found a macrame artist who has scraps, and I bought them from her. I also contacted a local macrame artist. I haven't heard back from them yet about buying their scraps, but macrame artists often have scraps that are like 1 or 2 feet long, which is not long enough for macrame, but it is long enough for weaving. So that is a way that you can get pretty inexpensive, decent sized pieces of interesting fibers. Yeah, for cheap, which I just said. Which is the same thing as pretty inexpensive. So that's just kind of another tip, just to kind of keep things cheaper. And for my cross-stitching friends, floss is an excellent warp, at least that I have found thus far. It's excellent for warping, and I have used it multiple times. So if you have kind of a junky floss that you don't love, you can use it as a warp. Just throwing that out there. All right, that's it from me. Thanks so much for joining me. I hope that you were inspired. Please tag me on Instagram at Dr_Christy if you end up making a little book loom and make a project. I would love to see what you're working on. So with all that being said, please take good care of yourselves and have a good one. Bye.